Alright folks, settle down. I know it's the one you've been waiting for, but we've got to get through this. Episode 69, Fights Gone By podcast. And I'm your boy, literally a better matchmaker than whoever booked Valentina Shevchenko versus Priscilla, local fighter, Jack Slack. Coming at you on the 5th of February, Monday morning. And we've got some news, some recaps of some fairly okay events, which were sort of overshadowed by a near murder, and then a ton of questions. So the most pressing issue is that Max Holloway is once again out of his title fight, or the title fight for Max Holloway is once again off. He suffered a leg injury, which has taken him out of the UFC 222 card. Obviously, tons of bollocks happened after that. Frankie Edgar seemed chill about it. Conor McGregor tweeted a picture of him hitting Max Holloway. Max Holloway replied with a picture of the referee stopping the fight between him and Mayweather. Nate Diaz is 100% interested in fighting at UFC 222. Just tons of bollocks. But if they do get Nate Diaz, they'll probably get a higher buy rate than they would have got with Edgar versus Holloway. A damn shame, because Max Holloway is one of the best fighters going today, and Frankie Edgar is a fantastic test to him. But I'm sure we will get that fight eventually. In answer to that, the UFC attempted to book Cody versus TJ2 on very short notice. This is an outright panic move if you look at it. There's no build-up, none of the drama of the first fight going into... Because the first fight was in the building for like a year. But, yeah, they tried to do that, and they basically announced it as if it was on. And then TJ Dillashaw came out and said, no, I'm not doing that. I had to wait 2 years to get another title shot. And, TJ Dillashaw was one of those ones who, famously, when he took a short notice fight to beat Joe Soto, which is more than enough favours for the UFC. But when he lost the belt, he lost a huge amount of money. It's like when Nunes refuses to fight on short notice or have a change of opponent or fight injured or whatever. She gets... What was it? She had the flu or something? Or failed to cut weight? I forget. But Dana White basically crucified her. And her response was like, I'd take a 50% pay cut if I lose the belt. The belt is what secures me this massive amount of money. So no, I'm not going to be competing half fit or half-arsed. So good for TJ Dillashaw turning that down. And I don't know, that is a real panic move. Your whole thing is that you're going to build up a fight between two heated rivals in a few weeks. Just dreadful. Anyway, not much else going on in the news aside from that Holloway news. But we got some fights to recap. Fight night in Belém, Lyoto Machida versus Eric Anders. We might as well start with the main event, because a lot of people felt very disappointed with the main event. I saw someone saying that they were not as ecstatic that Lyoto won that they thought they would be, but they were just glad he didn't get starched. The time is now for Lyoto Machida to hang it up, but this is a young prospect he's coming up against, and a legit prospect. I think he showed that in this fight, and he showed it in the other fights, and he did a good job against him. But a lot of people found it a little bit boring, a little bit disappointing. I'll just go through some of the things I saw that made it interesting for me. What I knew going in was that we had a relatively untested young prospect with some flaws in his game that I thought Machida would be able to draw out. And Machida, who has very obvious flaws in his game that everyone knows, which he was going to have to try and hide. First things first, Eric Anders likes to cut the ring. He's a real good guy with pressure, does great work along the fence, especially when guys are getting up, like the knee that he cracked Lyoto's forehead open with. Things like that. He does very good work off the quarter Nelson, does very good work when guys duck in on his hips from the fence, and will put together punching combinations when they're along the fence, which is much easier to hit dudes than if they're out in the open, especially a guy like Machida, where so much of his defense is straight retreat. The flip side of that, of course, is that Marcus Perez and Rafael Natal, not good ring generals. Lyoto Machida, terrible boxing with his hands and his head and his shoulders, but his feet generally really good. If you see him working along the fence, he's always changing direction, switching stances, coming out each side, faking the guy out. And I thought that would be the stuff that would really test Eric Anders' ability to get to the fence over and over again. And what you saw in this fight was that where against Marcus Perez and Rafael Natal, he'd get him to the fence, he'd do a bit of work. He'd get him to the fence again, he'd do a bit of work. There were much longer breaks between him being able to do effective work. And one of the things that really was highlighted in this fight was that he's a left-hand heavy fighter, and he really needs like a right hook. He needs to be able to step deep and hook off to the right side when Machida's going out that way. And he needs to add some low kicks. Skip up inside low kick when they were both southpaw would have worked wonderfully to pin Machida in place or slow him down. And the left leg to the inside of the rear leg when Machida was in the opposite stance would have worked. Low kicks along the fence, brilliant for ring cutting, or just holding dudes in place as they circle out with their feet almost level. But in the early going, it looked to be like Eryk Anders was going to give Machida a hard night. Obviously, the knee getting up along the fence. He looks for elbows in that sort of position generally, and he was landing a couple of good left hands. Machida, we talked about the need to switch stances and attack the open side, and not just come in on the same stance, southpaw, and then take a left hand over his low right shoulder while his chin's up in the air, as he often does. He was doing a very good job of switching stances, I thought, and looking for that body kick on the open side, which I said was something that Anders was going to struggle with and had struggled with previously. And in this fight, he struggled with it. There were a couple of really good body kicks went in. Didn't really go upstairs too often, which was a bit of a shame. There was a body kick caught, which I believe he turned into a takedown at one point. But that was what we said was the danger with the body kicking. Even though Machida keeps a fairly tight arc on his round kicks to the body, he does that Anthony Pettis style thing, tracing the line of the body or whatever it is. You're still kicking round. You're not taking up you're not occupying the center space with the kick. The kick is coming outside the center space, so the other guy can step down the middle and crack you. And that did happen. There was a really good left hand while Machida was on one leg. I think round 2, round 3. And it hurt him pretty clearly. And that's the danger of trying to round kick as someone's moving forward and pressuring you. You really have to circle off, get a lead on them so that you know that they've got to close the distance so much and they're going to be on the end of your kick by the time that you've thrown the kick, as opposed to panicking and trying to throw the kick while they're moving in on you and ending up on one leg and getting cracked in the face, which is what happens in a lot of these fights. Eric Silva versus Matt Brown is a great example of that. It even happened to Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey, and she was on point with her ring craft throughout. She just stopped, threw a round kick to the leg, and ate a left hook in the chin. We did talk about how the intercepting knee would probably still be effective in this fight, though, because that is a strike that comes up the centre. You're occupying the centre space, and the nice thing about the knee is, while you are putting it up there, so that if the opponent really is on point, they could just grab it as a single and try and hold on to it or something. Generally, you can bring it up, hit him in the stomach, and it can work as a barrier sometimes. That's a lot more common in Muay Thai, where guys aren't worried about the other guy hoisting the leg up or running the pipe or something like that. But Jojo Calderwood versus Andrade, she uses the knee quite nicely to keep Andrade off her in the first couple of exchanges, just as like a barrier. Semi Schilt used to do that a lot. Obviously, from those examples, you're getting the height advantage helps there. But yeah, the knee can get in the way like that. And also, it's such a short strike that if you hit it while they're coming in and you immediately drop your weight, throw your hips back, start pummeling for position, you can generally almost they're ensuring that you're in the clinch so that you're not going to get hit with a counterpunch. Lyoto only threw a couple. Both of them clearly did work. It seemed to hurt Anders. But and there was a nice one where he threw the knee and then the punch off the same side. I mean, that's basic tournament karate stuff. Right kick, right hand, left kick, left hand. Actually, we were talking the other week about learning the uppercut. The step back uppercut, as in stepping back with your right foot and throwing the right uppercut. And one of the things that really helps me learn to punch while taking the right foot back was it's a really classic old karate basic. You get down in your nice low front stance, because it's karate, but you throw the right front kick, stamp it down behind you as hard as you can as you snap your hips around into the reverse punch, and just shortening that movement and then taking out the kick eventually and then just making it a normal punch with a step back or a stamp back. That's how I learned to do retreating punches much snappier than I previously did. Couple of nice front kicks shown. Round 4 I thought was the best showing Machida's had in a while. He came out and he was very aggressive for Machida, but he was also leading the dance around the cage, and he landed he switched to southpaw, landed a lovely left straight down the centre, and I thought, oh Jesus, don't do that. He did a hand trap into the left straight, but he immediately pushed into the clinch and crashed into it, knocking Anders off balance, so that when he came out of the clinch, it was exactly the same movement out of the clinch that got him knocked out by Brunson. His hands were low, his head was up in the air, but having crashed into Anders and pushed him off balance, Anders was nowhere near to hit him with the punch on the way out. And that's something you'll see Gunnar Nelson do, and the Reem did it against Mark Hunt. Punch and clutch is important, but when we say punch and clutch, in boxing you have to punch and land in the clinch. In MMA, you can punch and just slam into them shoulder first. And if you push a guy away like that, he's not going to hit you. Probably. Hard, at least. If you watch Giorgio Petrosian's career, I wrote an article called Giorgio Petrosian, and I think it was the answer to all strikes. Because Giorgio Petrosian constantly, he'll throw a combination, or very rarely throw a combination, Giorgio Petrosian, but he'll throw a strike, and then he'll immediately just give him a light shove away. And it's constant. You can watch any of his fights. Robin van Roosmalen's a really great example, because Van Roosmalen, obviously a guy who works very well in counter combinations. He takes the punches on his gloves, and he immediately comes back with a counter combination into a low kick. Real in-tight low kicks too. But he uses the other guy hitting his guard as a reference to know that he's close enough to start throwing those counter combinations. Whereas against Petrosian would hit him and immediately push him out of range, and Van Roosmalen would be completely out of position to do anything useful at all. So Machida got the close decision. Lots of people crying hometown decision, but it wasn't particularly contentious in my opinion. I thought it was a good close fight. I thought a lot more of it happened in the movement than it happened in the significant strikes. But I think that's an important learning experience for Eryk Anders. He's got good pressure, he's got good footwork getting guys to the fence. I feel like he needs to learn some better herding strikes, those circular strikes that cut off the circling, and also learn to move his feet as he punches better, because he seems to do very well when he gets his man to the fence, and then he'll feint a bit, and then he'll come in with a nice punching combination, and then they'll drop on his hips and he'll quarter Nelson them and start kneeing them or whatever, or he'll drop on their hips and then tie them up along the fence. Doesn't seem to do too well when he's trying to, when the guy is actively circling the entire time. He really needs to add right hook, low kick, shifting right hook, shifting left hook because he's a southpaw, but just some more options to make that last bit of distance, because it's never going to go perfect unless you're fighting guys who don't really know what they're doing, like Perez and Natal, in terms of ringcraft. I'm not saying they don't know what they're doing as fighters, because they're in the UFC. And I think that was the key difference here. I think he could have absolutely stopped Machida very early if Machida had fought like Perez, where he just sort of waited along the fence and then threw a hard strike to try and get off the fence, or ducked in on Anders' hips with a dreadful shot to get off the fence. The problem was that Machida knows how to stay off the fence. The real egregious fight on this card was Valentina Shevchenko versus Priscilla Cachoeira. We'll just call her Priscilla. But I pointed out that this was bollocks many, many times beforehand. You've always got to... I always treat women's MMA with a degree of caution, because I don't know everything about women's MMA. It's not like men's MMA, where if you are even fairly decent, someone will have told me about you at some point, and I'll have watched one of your fights, two of your fights. Women's MMA is still very much in the dark in a lot of the world. So, 8-0, undefeated prospect. You say that and people go, oh, but then all you had to do was type Priscilla Cachoeira into YouTube, and you could find her most recent fights. And every fight she's fought the same. Every fight, she's got a load of TKOs, but they're not from actually hitting the people hard. She walks forward with her chin up in the air getting hit, and the other person gets tired first. If you watched her fights, you knew this was the intention. Valentina Shevchenko, she has this crazy following now. It's kind of like Prime Rousey, just people going, well, the same thing would have happened if you booked her against Paige Van Zandt. And I'm like, I don't know. Paige Van Zandt actually has wins over recognisable names. Paige Van Zandt can actually fight to a degree. This was very specifically, they picked the person who was the worst stylistic matchup with her that they could find anywhere, and it had to be outside the UFC too. And then other people were saying, well, everyone was turning down fights with her. No, they weren't. Don't talk bollocks. You're just repeating bollocks that other people have told you. You're telling me that none of the bantamweights or strawweights who want to be in the flyweight division in the UFC, or the ones who've already competed in the flyweight division, none of them wanted to fight Valentina Shevchenko for fear of getting decisioned by the number one, non-champion, the number two bantamweight in the world. That's not a dangerous fight. It's not like you're fighting number 5 ranked Rumble, and you're like, there's no point in me taking a fight that dangerous when it doesn't really move me up at all. You're fighting someone who always goes to decision and has lost multiple close decisions on not doing enough. So this stuff that people are scared of Valentina, it sounds like bollocks. But then that just shows that this nonsense matchmaking has worked. People are still telling me, like, yeah, well, I could have seen the same thing happening if it was anyone else in there. You're like, no, that's the point. They picked the worst possible fighter they could find from outside the UFC to make this happen. Fucking dipshits in this sport, I swear. Anyway, yeah, so the point was, make Valentina look good, get Valentina a finish, because despite being a great, I'm not ever going to dispute that she's a good striker, a very good striker, but despite being a very good striker, she doesn't knock anybody out. So the point here was to get her a knockout, and she still managed to get the choke instead. But, from the get-go, we said this girl's going to walk forward chin first, she's going to get caught with counter right hooks, and that'll be her night over. So immediately she comes out, gets caught with counter right hooks, gets left straight down the pipe, and then Valentina decided to fight more aggressive than she's ever fought before, take this last down and just beat on her for, 2.5 rounds? No, 1.5 rounds? Whatever it was dire. And then the morning after, I wake up and I see Dana White going, oh, this Mario Yamasaki, he's terrible, blah, blah, blah. And people just joining in. Yeah, Mario Yamasaki's terrible, but the referee can only be responsible so much for defending a fighter. If you put Henrique da Silva in with Rumble Johnson and then were surprised when he got flatlined, that would just, you'd be a moron. So they made this obvious mismatch to try and build up Valentina as the killer at 125, and to break free of that image of a very conservative, sometimes tedious fighter at 135, and then they acted surprised when the girl got the snot beaten out of her. The corner should have stopped it, obviously, because she went back to the corner, told them that her knee was fucked and that she couldn't fight anymore, and they just said, shut up, and then sent her back out. Just absolutely dreadful. I mean, she'll get another fight in the UFC, but she probably doesn't deserve one. In terms of her skill, she deserves highest praise for taking a massive beating from the number 2 ranked bantamweight in the world. But, this really just sums up where we're at in the UFC, and where we're at in the women's divisions. You can still bring in nobodies, and because people don't know anything about the women's divisions, they'll go, oh, okay. There are still people telling me, no, she was 8-0 undefeated, and I have to say, watch her fucking fights. All you had to do was type her name into YouTube to watch her fucking fights. It also didn't help that the 8 fighters she beat were garbage too. So don't list me off statistics and act like that's the same as getting 5 wins in the UFC or whatever. It's like the other day I was talking about Fedor's decline, and some Fedor fanboy was like, oh, I think you'll find he was pound for pound number 1 in the world until 2010. What, you talk about 2007, Jack? And I was like, well, you can watch his fights from 2007 onwards, from the Sylvia fight, and he's basically just swinging, which you would see if you watched his fights, but because people are obsessed with numbers, the record tells you nothing. Be fair, this guy also thought that Fernando Gonzalez was a top 10 welterweight in the world because he once went 8-1 in his last 7. But anyway, enough of that bollocks fight. It was bollocks. I have no interest in reliving the technical minutiae of it. And frankly, it just made the entire endeavour in the women's divisions look bad. Hey, endeavour. That's what WME are called now. So quick roundup of what else happened on this card. Oh, Thiago Santos versus Anthony Smith. That was a really good fight. I really enjoyed that. And he got fight of the night. That's good. But Anthony Smith, huge dude. He was the one who fought Hector Lombard and got hurt early, and then was shouting between the corners in between the rounds, do you know my name yet, Hector? Do you know me yet? And then beat Hector Lombard, which was good. Because I'll happily watch Hector Lombard get knocked out as many times as possible. But, Thiago Santos hits him with a wheel kick. The calf connects, so it wasn't like the end of the moment arm, or whatever you want to call it. It wasn't the heel to the face. But he connects a wheel kick with the calf, and it makes the loudest bang you've heard on any kick in recent years. And Smith stumbles a bit, and then he runs in. Santos throws up a left high kick, and Smith ducks forward and takes it on the top of his head. And he's still, scrambled out and ended up in mount somehow. It was amazing. So even though he got beat up, Anthony Smith, he gave a really good account of himself. And the body kick that put him down, again, it's one of those things you just whiff the liver, if you catch it right, they'll just go down anyway. Because it looked from several angles like it just glanced the guy's liver. End of the toes, flicked it. But it was one of those ones where Smith took a step and then thought, ow, and just sort of fell down in a ball. We said it last week, hitting the body is the best because it doesn't matter how tough you are, you can be made to curl up like a baby if you're caught at the right time in the body. Sergio Moraes versus Tim Means I enjoyed, but Sergio Moraes came out and he was fighting like Joe Weller, which we will get into in a bit, but fighting like that YouTuber in the boxing match the other night. Just hands up, moving straight forward, no head movement, takes about 8 punches on his guard and through his guard, and then starts throwing punches. Tim Means, I thought he could have deserved the decision in this one, but again, it was close enough that I'm not going to be angry about it. Also, if you're fighting in Brazil, come on, man. You got to know that you got to do a good amount to win it. Anytime Tim Means throws an elbow, I chant at home. I go, boo-wee, or whatever it is the Thais say. Doesn't throw enough, because we know him for the elbows. And you're just like, please, Tim, throw some elbows. At least give us some fan service. Yuri Alcantara blowing out Joe Soto was awesome. But again, it was sort of just overwhelming him. Don't really have too much technical insight for you there, but I do like Yuri. Yuri, who did he lose to? Because he was having a good run, and then he sort of fell off the face of the earth. Yeah, he beat Wilson Hayes, which I remember, after losing to Uriah Faber. Beat Vaughan Lee, Russell Doan. Oh, yes, he lost to Frankie Sands. And then Jimmy Rivera. Well, that's a rough one, let's be fair. Brian Kelleher and Alejandro Perez back-to-back. Those are unusual ones for him, I would say. But he gets back in the winning column with Joe Soto. But I've always liked Yuri. I mean, he's a fun fighter. He's explosive. He's got power. He does interesting things. And he can also grapple pretty good too. He did decently against Wilson Hayes on the ground and other people. He's also been around forever. God, he's been in the UFC since 2011. That's not bad for a bantamweight. And he's been fighting since 2003. Wow, he's got a 15-year career. And there was me thinking he's one of the young guns. He's 37. Shit. You know what they say? Black don't crack. Just got that young look. Thiago Santos is 34. Jesus, where are all these old guys coming from? Oh, but Thiago Santos has beaten Jack Marshman, who I like, and Jack Hermansson, who I like, in the row. So he's got a streak of 4 wins going there, all by stoppage. Good for him. I completely forgot he lost to Gegard Mousasi too. Anyway, that event was alright. Begrudgingly, it was okay. Just sort of got overshadowed by the bollocks matchmaking. The other event that I watched this weekend was Joe Weller versus KSI. And I didn't know this was going on until someone said, can you give me your thoughts on this? Link me the stream. And I was just like, why am I watching these two fuckboys fight in the middle of the day on a Saturday? And it really just... You got the two worst parts of fighting this weekend. You got the horrible mismatch to build up the name in the Valentina Shevchenko fight. And then you got the famous people who can't fighting in this one. And the moment I went into it, I was like, oh, these fuckboys are going to get more views than Jacare Brunson II. And they smashed it. I mean, it was like... They both streamed it on their channels, I think, and one of the streams had 1.2 million viewers at one point. I assume the other one was about even. So, you got like 2.5 million viewers, for a bollocks fight between people who can't fight. One of them could fight a bit, and one of them couldn't really fight at all. It was bad. And then it turned out that they had a whole card of YouTubers that you didn't know. I've never felt more out of touch with young people than I did then. And this is something I'm experiencing more and more, because the other day they had the Kaiser Chiefs on Radio 2, and I was like, but these guys are a new band. It was a bad moment where I realised, oh shit, the world's passing me by. Anyway, that's enough ranting about the shit fights this weekend. Let's do some questions. Dear Jack, thanks for all the podcasts. I especially enjoy the timely ones you are doing now. Thank you. I hope this goes up on time now. Do you think you could do a spoiler-free rating for the fights as soon as you are done watching and publish it on the Fight Primer website and or mention it in the podcast? As a fellow European, I rarely can be bothered to stay up all night. Yeah, I get you there. Ruin my sleep schedule just to watch the UFC. But since watching replays isn't as exciting as watching it live, I tend to only watch the big-name fights, which aren't always the ones worth watching. Conversely, many fights between lesser-known guys end up being pretty good. So if you did a spoiler-free rating or something like that, it would allow me to specifically seek out the fights that are worth watching and watch them ... on Fight Pass, of course. Would be a big improvement to my Sundays. Cheers, Justin. Yeah, I'd be interested in this idea, actually. I've been thinking of doing like a Meltzer-style star system for a while. Could be a good way to get people to watch fights. I'd had to like try and make a database of it like that did with Meltzer's stuff. But again, we'd be talking about different things attract people in different fights. Everyone likes a slobber knocker, but if it's a really good technical back and forth, I tend to prefer that over a slobber knocker. But then some slobber knockers I do prefer over technical. So it's complicated, but it's hard to do with a not really a binary system, but like a set in stone number system. Kind of. I'd have to probably do pros and cons of the fights or something. I don't know. You guys let me know in the comments or in your emails what I should do there. But I think there's definitely something I could do there. Jack, as an orthodox fighter facing southpaws, traditional wisdom is to often get the lead foot outside of theirs and fire home a more powerful right hand. However, I often face one particular crafty southpaw who seems to give up outside foot position, wait for the right hand to come, and slip to the outside, then fire back his own left hand. I have experimented with throwing my right hand to the body to make it more difficult for him to slip, but apart from that, I am mostly out of ideas. Any suggestions? Loving the 2 podcast a week format. Keep up the good work, from Joe. Off the top of my head, sounds like, he's conceding the outside angle, or really making you give him an inside angle, and then coming in from the open side with that left hand. You've got to be kind of careful throwing your right hand like that. I mean, look at Eddie Alvarez versus Conor McGregor. We talked about how the double right hand could be useful, but then he was reaching for it so much that it really did just open him up for the counter. The double jab is a great one against anyone who's waiting on anything like that. So the double right hand can work in that sense, but you are then giving them the opening that they want. If you work the double jab a little bit easier, if they're checking the lead hand very well, work with the skipping stone jab, slap the lead hand down, and then jab into the face, and you can make them do some stuff. I'd look for the long right uppercut or right hook to the body, and then either try and fall into the clinch after it, or try and pivot off to the left side. Anything to just frustrate him, make him move, and try and counter when he doesn't want to. And then if you can get in a couple of blows to the body, which isn't moving as much as the head, that's always good. And trying to eliminate his counter by either smothering him in a clinch straight after your punch, or pivoting offline, or just keep working behind the jab and flicking at him so that you're not really opening yourself up to the counter. I'm assuming this is boxing. If it's kickboxing, then feint him back and try and kick him in the head when he leans is my advice. Stand him up with the high kicks, and then you can start working to the body and things like that afterwards. Or if you guys who rely on slipping away and ducking under and things like that with punches, as soon as you start throwing high kicks, they're going to have to stand up, and then you can start punching them again. As long as you keep putting in that high kick to say, you don't want to get back to ducking just yet, mate. Hi Jack, I've got a Muay Thai fight coming up in a few weeks, and my opponent is a Dutch-style kickboxer type, focus on punching and low kicks. What would your tips for a typical Muay Thai style versus Dutch kickboxer style in Muay Thai rules be? Brackets, no elbows allowed. Shit! Also, you seem pretty well educated on Muay Thai in general. Would be good to see you do some breakdowns or studies on Muay Thai styles / fighters, a la Lawrence Kenshin, except with your dulcet tones. Thanks, from Chris. Yeah, Muay Thai is a hard thing to keep up with, I find, because not only am I trying to keep up with Glory and K1 I'm trying to get back into, you've also got Kunlun, and even then you're still only in the kickboxing area. When you're getting into full Muay Thai, it's even more complicated. I don't know if there's any message boards where I can keep up with this shit, but it's very, very tricky, especially with the amount of work I'm doing on MMA. However, I would have said elbows straight from the get-go, but if it's a no elbows allowed, stepping knees are always a little bit confusing for straight kickboxers, especially if you're using hand traps. If you look at someone like Muang Thai, the guy with all the elbows, he also does a lovely thing where he'll sweep his hands, he'll check both their hands and step up for the knee, or he'll sweep his hands around behind their guard and do like a pincer movement, pull their guard forward and step into knees. Anytime you can check their hands is a good way of taking away, especially if they rely on punching combinations into low kicks. Anytime you are smothering their hands, you're taking away that first step, and then they're going to start trying to low kick with you. And that's a little bit more Muay Thai style, when you're both trading kicks. And that's where your teep will work and all that other stuff that's very much Thai style. Get into the hand fighting, even though you won't be able to turn over the elbows into the head, you will be able to step in with the knees to the body, and you'll be able to throw kicks off it too. And if you're quicker on the kick, quick draw as opposed to out of combinations, then that's always good for you too. That's typically something you see more out of Thai gyms than like kickboxing gyms. A focus on getting the kick in faster naked than the opponent. Hi Jack, I was reading one of your old Vice articles where you talked about some, not all, of Hazlitt's defensive elements. Can you point out which defenses from all the elements you think are the best to adopt for MMA, like a top 3? And the article is called The Bible of Striking Elements of Defense. There's 2 Bible of Striking articles I did on Hazlitt's stuff. Also, when will you write the follow-up article with the advanced elements explained? I'd love to read it. You did end the article saying that you would do an article in your book club. Can you send me a copy? Blah, blah, blah. Blake. This is my way. I start series and then I just sort of don't complete them. But yeah, Hazlitt's, just going from my article here, the Hazlitt's elements of defense are divided into blocking, guarding, parrying, stopping, slipping, ducking, weaving, rolling, sidestepping, and clinching. From those basic ones, sidestepping, clinching, and probably stopping would be the most important. I would love to see more use of the leverage guard, the straight arm over the shoulder. Stopping at the biceps, also would love to see more of that. There's too much blocking, really, in MMA, and this is one of the points that you'll see both in Hazlitt and everything else. It gets a lot easier to smother punches at the root than it is to take them once they've got all the momentum. Covering up is really the worst defense for anything, even boxing. Smothering them with the open hands or the hand in the bicep or whatever is good. Parries you don't really see used very well in MMA. You see guys parry blows just to get the blow away from their face. Really, if you're knocking the blow off course, you want to be throwing back down the path of where it had come from. So if you parry a jab with your right hand, like a good committed jab, like in MMA, guys are going to step in 100%. You parry a jab with your right hand, you immediately want to shoot, say, the right hand down the line of the jab, and then follow into a combination or whatever. That's using a parry to actually make something happen. Otherwise, there was really no point in doing it. You could have just stepped back or moved your head, which would have been easier than trying to time you parrying their hand. But sidestepping is probably the most important. Guys in MMA still come in on straight lines, and the later in the fight they get, the more prone they are to doing that. Frankie Edgar has won a world title and gone for a world title at 2 weights, and still, when he got in with Jose Aldo, he only came in on a straight line. And the more that Jose Aldo pivoted off or sidestepped, the more Edgar just came in on that straight line. We work in such an exaggerated distance compared to boxing that guys do have to cover distance to start their combinations. And then you get into this habit of sort of running straight, and that's where pivots and stuff and sidesteps become really useful. I'll have to give that one some further thought. I might have to try and complete that series at some point. Good day to you, Jacare Slack. In a fairly recent interview with Vander Holyfield, he mentioned that a lot of opponents would punch the hip in order to elicit a reaction. Technically, it's below the belt, but fighters wouldn't protest, as they would a groin shot. As he mentioned, doing so might mentally throw them out of a mental space they needed to be in for the fight. What is your omnipotent opinion on the validity of this technique? Is it merely a distraction or an attempt to mentally defeat an opponent? Can any legitimate damage be done by a punch to the hip? I have heard it discouraged even kicking the hip in Muay Thai, which is a much harder, larger surface. Your Patreon boy forever, Stefan. P.S. Shout out to Don the Occasional Lemon and Uncle Richard. Okay. Yeah, the hip is an odd one because, like, if you catch it, if you kick the hip with your foot or whatever, you're going to hurt yourself. But it is, if you banged your hip on a worktop, you know that it can be hurt pretty easily. But the idea of hitting the hip in boxing traditionally is to raise bruising and to limit mobility. Or certainly that's what Joe Frazier used to think that you could do, because he did it to Muhammad Ali through 3 fights. Anytime you say, is hitting something viable, if it's got skin on it, it's viable to hit, because, if you start jabbing your thigh or your hip or wherever with your thumb, and you just do that a few times, after a while it's going to get old, and it won't take long to start busting capillaries and build up swelling. And swelling is more valuable than like a one-hit knockdown in many regards. Like the jab. We talk about aiming for the eyes, not because you could probably really hurt a guy if you jumped in with a jab to the chin and caught him flush. Barbosa versus Cerrone, there's quite a few examples in MMA of guys with the big power jab knocking a guy down. But if you get in the habit of just placing the jab on his eye with just a little flick, you can do more in the long term by having him struggling to see than you can in the short term by just hitting him as hard as you can. So the hip thing, obviously a lot more useful if you're going 15 rounds back in the day. But knees to the hip are also a good... And by the hip, I don't mean like the hip bone, I mean like the hip joint, where everything joins up. But the hip bone would work as well. Yeah, I mean, I think its value is also in pissing people off in boxing because it is illegal. It could be like the kidney punch, the kidney punch in the clinch. Even in Jim Driscoll's books back in like the 1930s, he was complaining that some guy, a pretty good fighter, got famous. And he was a good fighter all around, but he also liked to punch the kidneys in the clinch. And people saw this, and then he said, like, every amateur contest for the next 10 years turned into just clinching and kidney punching, because it wasn't the kidney punch that made the guy great, but people caught on to the kidney punch. And fighters love a little bit of, like, folklore or really pseudoscience. People like, in the fight game, to just sort of make up what will happen. So maybe fighters do believe that they can really bruise up the hips and lock up the legs, but the amount of time you'd need to do it, and you'd have to be hitting it consistently, I don't think it's really that useful for anyone, so probably more useful as a mental tactic. Cheers, Stefan. Right, I reckon that'll do us for the first podcast of this week. We'll be back either Thursday or Friday to preview the massive UFC 220 card. Well, the alright 220 card. It's got Rockhold versus Romero. What's not to like? If you want to get in on the Patreon lectures, sign up and become a Patreon boy. If you want to keep up with what I'm doing and wherever I'm doing it, I put up all my articles on thefightprimer.com, regardless of where they are. I put a link up. And I do my own prospect watch there, thefightprimer.com. And if you haven't bought Notorious or Finding the Art, do that. Send your emails to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Cheers.